Roman parties were not just a display of luxury, wine, and excess. Behind each glass of wine, behind every opulent feast, lay dark secrets, political games, and, at times, tragedies that changed the fate of the empire. In the Knights of Rome, not everything was fun, and what seemed like a celebration could turn into a power struggle. But what was it really like to attend a party in ancient Rome? Was it just an escape from the hustle and bustle of life, or a fertile ground for conspiracies, power, and even mortal danger? Today, we will unveil the hidden face of these legendary parties and discover the true purpose behind every banquet, every toast, and every laugh. Don't go away, the best is yet to come. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the notifications so you won't miss any of the secrets we have in store. Because ancient Rome has much more to tell us. Wine, an indispensable drink at any party, was not only a source of intoxication in ancient Rome, but also a symbol of status and power. For the most powerful Romans, wine was more than just a drink, it was a statement, a sign of wealth and distinction. While the plebeians settled for beer, which was considered of low rank, the aristocracy drank wine, which was considered so vital to their daily life that, according to historians, each Roman consumed a bottle of wine a day. But despite its high alcohol content, the Romans never ended their parties in a state of uncontrolled drunkenness. They mixed wine with water, a gesture that not only controlled the alcohol level but also demonstrated their self-control and good taste. But not everything was perfect. The taste of Roman wine, stored in large terracotta jars, left much to be desired. The wine was robust and sometimes unpleasant, with a mix of spices that made it somewhat exotic. At grand parties, it was common to serve two types of wine. The first, hot, with a strong and spiced flavor, prepared especially for the Roman palate; the second, a sweet wine infused with honey, for those who preferred something milder. But, regardless of the type, Roman wine was never served without a good dose of water, a detail that separated the aristocrats from the plebeians. Roman parties were not only a place to enjoy banquets and entertainment but also a space where power networks were woven and social relationships were consolidated. The Romans understood that attending a party wasn't just about pleasure, but an opportunity to reinforce their status in society. It was a game of perceptions, where every gesture, every gift, and every interaction could have political and social consequences. Just like today, Roman parties were a place where people demonstrated what they had. But here, the ostentation went beyond banquets and decoration. It was about showing power. Where you sat, the type of food you offered, the drink you served, everything had a purpose: to impress others and, at the same time, solidify your position in the social hierarchy. And it wasn't just about what you had, but with whom you shared it. The seating arrangements at the table were not random. The hosts made sure that the most strategic relationships were well represented. Allies sat together, rivals kept their distance, and conversations were meticulously orchestrated to avoid conflicts. Roman dinners were a true spectacle of luxury and opulence. The Romans didn't just eat to satisfy hunger, they ate to impress their guests, show their wealth and power, and, above all, leave an indelible mark on the memory of those attending. The literary sources of the time described these banquets as a caress for the senses, exotic delicacies, luxurious tableware, and an environment carefully designed to captivate. The Roman dining room, a central space in the house, was decorated with spectacular mosaics, mural paintings, sculptures, and luxury furniture. Everything was arranged to make the meal a memorable event, not only in taste but in its presentation. The reclining couches where Romans sat to eat were a symbol of status. These comfortable pieces of furniture were not available to everyone, only the wealthiest could afford these luxury spaces. And the food, a variety of exotic delicacies adorned the tables. Lobsters, pheasants, seafood, and even peacocks were served on gold and silver tableware. Opulence had no limits. Every dish served was a work of art, meant not only to satisfy but to delight and astonish. The Romans knew that a banquet was not just a meal, it was an opportunity to dazzle. But a Roman party wouldn't be complete without the touch of music and art. Artistic performances were not limited to the decoration of the dining rooms but were also an integral part of the entertainment. At banquets, it was common for musicians, poets, and actors to showcase their talents to beautify the atmosphere. Live music accompanied conversations and toasts, while poetry and acrobatics became the center of attention. Visual arts, sculptures, and mosaics adorned the houses of the rich, while artists brought Roman culture to life at every party. Everything was designed to envelop the guests in an atmosphere of luxury and sophistication. At each of these events, art not only served to entertain but also to highlight the power of the host. Each piece of music, each performance, was carefully selected to convey the grandeur of imperial Rome. At a Roman feast, the seat you occupied was not just a matter of comfort, but of status. The seating arrangement at the table was a politically and socially significant act. It was not just, sit wherever you can, each seat was carefully reserved to reflect the rank and influence of the guests. The head of the table, for example, was the place of honor, where the most powerful sat, whether because of their age, status, or closeness to the host. But, just like at modern gala dinners, it wasn't only rank that mattered, but also personal relationships. Allies grouped together, and rivals were kept at a distance. The Romans knew that seating placement could say a lot about the power dynamics. And, as with many modern events, seating arrangements didn't just reflect prestige, but also the host's pleasure in bringing together the right people at the right moment. Roman parties were not just about food, drink, and sophisticated conversations. If you really wanted to impress your guests, it was necessary to offer them something more. And what better way to do this than with a gladiator show? Instead of typical musicians or actors, at some of the more exclusive parties, gladiator fights were organized. But these were not the great battles of the Colosseum. No, these fights were reserved for the most powerful in Rome. The gladiators were brought in to fight each other, not for thousands of spectators, but for a select group of aristocrats. These fights served not only to entertain, but also to showcase the host's control and power. Private gladiator fights were a way for the wealthy to demonstrate their dominance over life and death, and also a means to measure the character of those who sat at the table. How far could the hosts go to maintain their guests' attention? Sometimes, entertainment was not just about fun, but about control. If you thought Roman parties were just about wine, banquets, and entertainment, you'd be surprised to know that sex played a crucial role in the power dynamics. For the Romans, sexual relationships were not just about pleasure, they were a tool for manipulation and control. During the most exclusive banquets, men and women of high society did not just gather to eat and drink, but also shared intimate moments with prostitutes or even other guests, as a way to strengthen alliances or, in some cases, to assert dominance over others. Sex, in this context, was a means of establishing power and exerting influence. And it wasn't just in the private aspects of the party where sex played its part. Orgies and libertine behaviors were not only seen as a pursuit of pleasure but also as an assertion of status. How far could the hosts go to show their control? Sexuality became a vehicle for power, with hosts as figures who imposed their rules, not only with food or wine, but with desire itself. Roman parties were not just an excuse to enjoy food and wine. At the heart of every banquet, there was an intricate web of power and politics. While guests enjoyed the delicacies, the host knew they were playing a much bigger game, one of manipulation and consolidation of power. For Roman emperors and politicians, a private party was a perfect opportunity to keep their allies close and, most importantly, their enemies even closer. Every conversation, every gift, and every gesture was a piece on a political board where favors were exchanged and alliances negotiated. And it wasn't just about visible strategies. Hosts used these gatherings to assess the behavior of their rivals, monitor potential threats, and, in some cases, even intimidate or eliminate those who jeopardized their power. Behind the laughter and fun, banquets became a subtle battlefield, where decisions made could alter the course of history. But not all Roman parties were private or steeped in politics. In Rome, there were also public celebrations, like those dedicated to Jupiter, the chief god of the Roman pantheon. These festivities were an opportunity for common people to partake in a sacred celebration and connect with the gods. The festivities in honor of Jupiter not only celebrated the divinity but also Rome itself. The people gathered in temples, where sacrifices were offered and food was shared with the gods, symbolizing the union between the Romans and their beliefs. These events, unlike private parties, were open to all, but even within this openness, a protocol was maintained. What was fascinating about these festivals was the deep religious devotion intertwined with the sense of national identity. The city, the people, and the god formed a single entity during these celebrations, which elevated the collective morale and reaffirmed the greatness of the Roman Empire. Among the most extravagant festivals of Rome, the Bacchanals stood out for their total libertinism. Dedicated to the god Bacchus, the god of wine, these celebrations were a mix of wine, music, sex, and chaos. Unlike the events controlled by the elite, the Bacchanals were mass celebrations, where euphoria and uninhibited behavior took control. What began as a religious celebration in honor of Bacchus soon transformed into an uninhibited festival full of excesses. Romans from all social classes indulged in these feasts, leaving behind all etiquettes and morality. Senators, soldiers, plebeians, all mixed in a climate of absolute debauchery. The chaos of the Bacchanals reached such a point that the Roman Senate decided to intervene, prohibiting the celebration of these festivals throughout the empire, except in certain special cases. Despite the restrictions, the Bacchanals continued to be one of the wildest and most legendary festivals of ancient Rome. If you thought the Bacchanals were the height of depravity, the parties organized by Emperor Caligula took libertinism to an even more extreme level. Caligula, known for his erratic behavior and abuse of power, organized parties that became synonymous with decadence and broken morality. In his time, Caligula's parties were much more than mere banquets. They were orgies, events where aristocrats and slaves shared the same table, intoxicated by wine and the drugs of the era. In these feasts, promiscuity, abuse, and incest became common practices, and Caligula himself, in his quest for absolute power, used these parties to impose his dominance over all. Historians describe Caligula's parties as a festival of indulgence, where the rules of morality were completely annulled. The most powerful in Rome not only participated in these acts but encouraged them, enjoying the chaos that the emperor had created. Orgies, endless alcohol consumption, and sexual relations between close family members became symbols of the reign of an emperor whose power seemed limitless. One of the most persistent myths about Roman parties is the famous vomitorium. Many believe that at these events, Romans would go to a special room to vomit so they could continue eating more. However, this myth has no basis in historical reality. In reality, the term vomitorium does not refer to a room for vomiting, but rather to the passages or corridors in Roman theaters that allowed for quick exits of the audience. These passages were wide enough for crowds to move quickly, whether entering or exiting, and had nothing to do with the excessive consumption of food. The myth about the vomitorium likely arose from the idea that Romans were known for their opulent banquets and love for excess. But in reality, there was no formalized practice of vomiting to continue eating. What did exist was a public display of consumption and luxury, which was often misinterpreted.